I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today.
You know, Billy, we have a little bit different going on today.
We're doing a live remote.
We are, yes.
We're actually coming to you from the Central Hardwoods Forest Conference. This is a conference that the UK Department of Forestry and Natural Resources has been hosting for the last few days. And we've got foresters and scientists and agency people from all over, really, the eastern U.S. and the Central Hardwood region. Right. So all the way up from Connecticut down into Georgia. So it's really great to have everybody here and bringing them into Lexington. But we did not want the show to stop.
We didn't.
So we're here live, and we took a little break from the conference to join you all today, and we thank you all for being with us. We've got a really interesting show today. I'm really excited. You know, we are in that water awareness week time period, and we have Mr. Lee Moser is going to be with us, and he's going to be talking about something, Renee, we may not think a lot about, the groundwater.
Yeah, it's really important. We really don't think about that, but it's a very important thing that we should be thinking about.
I think after Lee's presentation, we'll have a much greater appreciation for it. And then we've got our Wings of Kentucky, right, with Dr. DJ McNeil. He's going to be on with us. So we're really excited about today's show. If you all can interact with us via the chat function in Zoom, and if you're on YouTube, hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we can respond that way. But yeah, really glad to have you all with us live from the Hilton downtown in Lexington.
First time we've ever done a live remote, so this is really I like to know that we can. So we want to go ahead and get started. I think we're going to watch DJ's video first.
To this month's Wings of Kentucky. This week we're going to talk about a favorite species of mine, the American woodcock. But before we jump into the American woodcock, I'd like to mention a quick correction last week about Niger seed, or sometimes called Niger thistle. A couple of viewers asked about, like, hey, Niger thistle seed, like I don't really want thistle growing in my yard. This seems pretty weird. And I did a little bit more digging, and I was actually incorrect. Even though it's often called Niger thistle, it's not a thistle at all. It's a species of African sunflower or African daisy. It's kind of in that aster family. And it's actually grown mostly in India. It's kind of semi-domesticated. This is kind of a clip from the Wikipedia page on the species, that Niger thistle, if you will, or Niger as it's probably just more appropriately called. It's from that page. And to make things a little bit better, if you're concerned about even this non-thistle spreading, this page here from audubon.org actually talks all about Niger, and it's actually completely sterilized before it's used. Sorry about the phone. I can turn the volume down, whoever they are. Pardon me. So yeah, it's completely sterilized before it's sold for use. I actually did kind of a semi deep dive into this, and they've tried to grow Niger in the US, and it's kind of been a struggle. Places like, you can actually sort of see a little bit of that text here. In Minnesota, they tried to grow it, and then they took it further south and tried to grow it too. And like, they're sort of sometimes able to cultivate it. However, even when they do manage to cultivate Niger in the US, it's not easy to extract the seed. It's just kind of a huge pain. So this is all to say, Niger is not actually a species of thistle, and when you buy the seed in your local bird store or hardware store or what have you, it's totally sterilized. So that's a little bit of note about that. Apparently, as best I can tell, it seems to be intentionally labeled as thistle to sort of misguide folks who are, know that goldfinches and pine siskins like thistles. Okay, so let's move on to our topic of today, the American woodcock. Now, the American woodcock, the scientific name is Scolopax minor. For any kind of bird overview, we have to at least briefly get into one of these boring slides about kind of basic biology. And taxonomy. And the reason why we're doing that for the woodcock, in addition to kind of it always being helpful, the woodcock is especially confusing because it's what we call a game species. So it's very heavily hunted, but it's not kind of it's not an upland game bird, as they're often called, or a galliform. It is technically a shore bird. So I have the short-billed dowitcher on here, which is another shorebird. Strictly for comparison purposes, we can see, hey, look, short-billed dowitcher is very similar to an American woodcock structurally. Now, big difference is obviously the plumage on the American woodcock is kind of this brown and dark, like almost black and silver, kind of mottled like it would blend in with fallen logs and leaf litter. And that's because the American woodcock, I specifically picked a picture that had the woodcock out in the open, but they are a bird of woodland areas. They do not like to be out in the open like this one. This one's probably feeling pretty nervous here. It is a forest and shrubland nesting bird, and they pretty much spend almost no time near large bodies of water. Now, there are many cool things about the American woodcock, and we're going to discuss a few of them today, but one of my favorite things about woodcocks is that this time of year here in Kentucky, they're returning from their wintering grounds to begin courtship. Now, there are some woodcock that winter in Kentucky, and maybe those that do are just, finally feeling frisky enough to begin their courtship here. But if you go out to an area that has woodcock and wait right at dusk, you will have the privilege of witnessing the song of the woodcock. The song being a vocalization used to attract mates and defend territories. Not a very musical song. In fact, if you didn't know any better, you might think that the song of the woodcock was some kind of frog. So let's take a look at that woodcock singing and see what it looks like and what it sounds like. Certainly not a very musical song. And the woodcock basically stands there for up to several minutes, kind of doing that vocalization until it's time to engage in the flight portion of the display. So what the woodcock does next is he leaps up into the air, flies up. So here he is on the ground in this image. He flies up, kind of zigzags through the sky, and then what he does, he kind of meanders through the sky, making these sounds. And once he hits the ground, he pretty much stops and resumes his funny little song. Hopefully that's coming through. One of the really bizarre things about the woodcock flight display is, you may think, well, gee, he's got that kind of frog-like call, and now he's making this sort of like twittering, liquidy warble. Well, the remarkable thing about that flight display and the sounds you hear is it's actually caused by the bird's wing. Male woodcocks have 3, and females kind of have them too, but they're very pronounced in the male. Very skinny outer primary flight feathers. So you can see these primary flight feathers are somewhat normal, but these 3 out at the outer tip of the wing are very small and skinny. And each time the bird flaps a wing, it makes one of those squeaking notes. So it kind of almost sounds like a songbird singing a beautiful song, but really the woodcock, his mouth is completely shut, and all of that sound is produced by the wings. Really cool breeding display. And if you go out right at sunset to some of these spots, you can find a woodcock doing the courtship display. One of my personal favorite things to do is find a woodcock that's doing the song, or sometimes called a peent. Find a painting woodcock. When he flies up into the air to do that flight display, run as quickly as you can to the spot where he was singing, and then stop and don't move. And he'll come land right near you and continue the painting. And then when he flies, again, you can get closer and closer and closer. If you're wearing camouflage, you don't move, he'll land right next to you and do that display. It's such a cool bird. So where are places you can find woodcock? Well, it's a really common and widespread bird in many parts of Kentucky, but you're generally going to want to look for shrubby areas, early successional areas, places that have shrubs and grasses interspersed. They don't tend to like a lot of canopy cover, but they don't like to have a lot of urban cover either. You don't usually want to go to just like a grassy like hay field, but if you've got like an agricultural field, like a pasture that's got some shrubs and woody stems mixed in, they will absolutely be in there at least some of the time. Now, this bird is very bizarre. So I've got some images here of woodcock. This is the skull of the American woodcock, and you see one hole here and then one hole here. Well, on a normal creature, a normal animal, you might think, well, that's the eye hole and that's the ear hole. Well, in the case of the woodcock, it's totally the opposite. So this one here, actually kind of in front of the eye, is actually the ear hole. This giant one is the eye hole. It's a nocturnal bird, as I think you're probably guessing at this point. So having those really big eyes is very helpful. Now take a look also at the position of the eye in relation to the rest of the skull. It's got this kind of like long rostrum area, and when you look at the bird itself, there's like the eye is really far back here. It's like on the back of the head. And the reason for that is the woodcock, and they've got this long bill, it spends most of its day with its head probed down into the soil. This one looks like it's probably during the daytime, but whether it's foraging in the day or at night, it's got that beak stuck down in the soil. And if you're spending most of your day with your bill shoved in the soil, it's very helpful to have your eyes back on the back of your head, so that way you can still watch for predators while you're probing in the soil. Very weird bird. The bill is also prehensile. They can actually open just the tip of the bill while the base of the bill is closed. So they can stick their bill down into the soil and grab earthworms, which is mostly what they're eating. Now, nesting ecology. So this is a woodcock nest here. Not a very accomplished nest builder, the woodcock, but they don't really need to be. They lay almost exclusively a clutch of 4 eggs. Occasionally they'll have fewer if, say, a predator takes an egg, like a snake. But they have these kind of like drab beige eggs with these brown speckles. They're relatively well camouflaged, pretty good sized eggs for a bird of its size. And again, they don't really need a nest because most of the time the adult is going to be sitting on those eggs and is quite well camouflaged herself. So the female does all the incubating. After they mate, the male and the female have nothing to do with each other. The male doesn't help care for the young at all. It's all work done by the female. And after a couple of weeks of incubating those eggs, well, they hatch out into some very cute little fluffy babies. So in this case, we've got 1 egg, 2 egg, 3 egg, 4 egg, which is typical for woodcocks. And here are these 4 little fluffy babies, extremely cute little guys. And just like, say, a baby chick, think of a chicken chick or a gosling or a duckling, these birds are what we call precocial. In a precocial bird, as soon as it hatches, they dry off for a few hours, and then their eyes are open, their legs are functional, and they follow around behind mom, and she shows them how to forage. So they're actually feeding themselves. She's not feeding them at all, just like a mother hen doesn't really feed her chicks. Now, similar to a mother hen, what the woodcock may do is she may say, hey kids, there's food over here. Here's a piece of food, eat it yourself. I found it for you. So she's gonna guide them and lead them to food. And of course, she'll also help them thermoregulate. So they don't have true feathers yet, they just have this down. So when it gets rainy or at nighttime, they'll crawl underneath mom and she'll fluff up and keep them warm over the night. But otherwise, when they're wandering around during the day, they're following right behind mom on their own 2 legs. Now, at the end of the summer and into the fall, woodcock begin to migrate south for the winter. So this is actually an image from iNaturalist. It's really cool. Check it out, iNaturalist.org. That shows all the records people have uploaded of American woodcock. So right now they've got 6,000 records of woodcock. You can upload pictures, you can upload sounds, all kinds of things. But you can see that there's these 2 pronounced humps, kind of one here in like October and November, and one in like March, April, May. So this March, April, May hump is spring migration. This is when we're seeing a lot of woodcock that are moving either from south to north or that are actually actively starting their courtship. In midsummer, you can see they kind of vanish. It's not because they actually vanish, they're just very inconspicuous during the summer. And then the fall time, we see fall migration. A lot of people see woodcock during that period of time, which is also when you can go out and hunt woodcock. Now, speaking of which, woodcock is a very popular game bird, so it's worth noting that. Commonly hunted alongside grouse, and and it's a good species for hunting. They hold really tight, so like if you walk up on a woodcock during the daytime, they're not going to just fly away most of the time. They're usually going to hold really tight and hope that you don't see them. Now, of course, a trained dog can smell the woodcock and can point the woodcock while the hunter flushes it and harvests that bird. So it's a very popular game bird. Now, it's worth noting that the woodcock populations have been declining for decades. And this does not seem to be driven by hunting at all. We're going to talk about why that is. But the North American Woodcock Singing Ground Survey, which has these kind of eastern and central regions, Kentucky falls into the central region, and they monitor these dark colored states for woodcock and have been for a long time. And essentially what we've seen is slow and steady population declines of American woodcock. And with a lot of species that are heavily hunted, it's tempting to think, man, like, is hunting the thing that's causing them to decline? Well, it doesn't seem to be the case in woodcock. There are many threats. This is literally the screen cap that I just took this morning of iNaturalist. These are the most recent records of woodcock on iNaturalist. This seems to be a happy little woodcock here. These two are sound recordings of woodcock singing like we showed earlier. And then this one, and these three, again, these are just the most recent ones, are woodcock that have crashed into buildings, which seems to be a major issue with American woodcock. While they're migrating, they have a very strong propensity to fly into buildings. But the main driver of woodcock population declines, like so many other early successional dependent birds, is the loss of their habitat, usually due to succession, which is a natural process, but with disturbance suppression, succession causes woodcock habitat like this over 20, 30, 40 years to turn into something like this, which is not appropriate for woodcock. Now, to get this again, we would need some kind of timber management or fire or some kind of disturbance, which is one of the main ways we conserve woodcock populations today is with timber management, shrub shearing, shrub management that turns a mature forest back into something early successional for American woodcock. So I think that's all I have for you this week. Go out and find some woodcock, watch that flight display, and think about the habitat that species needs. And I guess for this bird of the month, cherish the American woodcock, and we'll touch base next month for the next installment of Wings of Kentucky. Get out there, happy birding. We'll talk to you then.
Oh, neat segment.
Did you know that it was related to shorebirds?
No, I had no idea.
That was really cool.
Even though both of them kind of look like they were on a beachy kind of thing, and I thought, oh, I wonder where that one is, you know.
And then that time when it looked like its eyes were behind its
I
chest.
know. I was like, I wish I could do that. My daughter would say, you do that, but, sometimes it was just like really neat because I know when they pointed it out, I was like, oh, look, you can see it. He's looking that direction, it was really cool.
Yeah, big thanks to Dr. DJ McNeil for putting that together. Again, it's really, to me, it's really interesting and rewarding to kind of learn about some of these things. I don't know a whole lot about
definitely.
how they operate. It also makes a good case for, managing our woodlands, taking care of them. If you're a woodland owner and you'd like to see more woodcock in your property and your land's completely forested, maybe there's some time for some openings, maybe some timber management activities, maybe a timber harvest even, or other things. And that's something I've really kind of learned a lot from DJ is just how important forest management, timber harvesting is to so many of our bird populations. So as our forests continue to grow and kind of get thicker and thicker, we are kind of taking away some of that habitat. So certainly think about a lot if you're talking to your private lands biologist, or if you're talking to your forester and you're interested in wildlife, especially maybe some of these birds that we've been highlighting here on From the Woods today, ask them about, maybe creating some space for them or habitat for them. I'm sure they would appreciate it. And I know Dr. McNeil would appreciate it.
Definitely would. All right. So we are going to move on to our next guest. Lee, if you'd like to turn your camera on. Welcome to the show again. We greatly appreciate you joining us to talk about groundwater.
Hey, it's good to see everyone again today.
Greetings.
That was an exciting presentation on the American woodcock.
It really was. It really was.
Yeah, but we're talking about something that's kind of critical to everybody, right? Water.
That's right.
That's another thing, Renee, we often take for granted.
Oh, definitely. He's going to let us know all the ins and outs on what we should know about groundwater.
Yes.
Yeah, give me just a second. I'll get my presentation shared and get started for y'all.
Excellent.
So thanks again for the opportunity to share today, Billy and Renee. If y'all don't know me, I've been on here a couple times now, but I'm Lee Moser, and I'm an Agriculture Extension Associate for Water Quality and Quantity Issues in Kentucky, and that includes groundwater awareness and protection. So my experience with groundwater monitoring and protection has been through my work in environmental consulting, managing groundwater compliance monitoring, and reporting associated with the coal industry in the state, as well as addressing issues like sinkhole protection through our outreach related to the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan. So I'm here today to help celebrate Groundwater Awareness Week. Groundwater Awareness Week takes place March 10th through 16th in 2024, so we're right in the middle of it. So it's a great day to be talking about groundwater. Groundwater Awareness Week is an annual observance established in 1999 to highlight the responsible development, management, and use of groundwater. It's also an opportunity to encourage yearly groundwater well testing and well maintenance, and the promotion of policies impacting groundwater quality and supply. Groundwater advocates across the country use Groundwater Awareness Week to highlight local water issues in their communities. So we'll be doing just that today. If I can advance my slide. There we go. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to have a general overview of groundwater. We're going to kind of zoom out to the worldwide context of groundwater, look at the overall trends of groundwater use and issues in the United States. And we'll do the same for Kentucky in specific. And then we'll have some recommendations and resources for ways that landowners can protect groundwater on their property. So I like to start off many of my talks on the water topics with this diagram of the water cycle, because I think it really puts whatever part of the water cycle I'm focusing on in my talk into the greater context of just how complex and connected water management issues can be on our landscape. We often think about the above ground parts of the water cycle, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, but what happens when water gets into the ground? As Billy and Renee mentioned earlier, it's often easily overlooked. So we'll be zooming in on that a bit and connecting with groundwater components of the water cycle. So what exactly is groundwater? Groundwater is the water that fills the cracks and other openings in the beds of rocks and sand below the soil zone, as shown in this image. When precipitation hits the ground, it can infiltrate into the soil or evaporate back into the atmosphere. Could run off too. Water then enters the soil, and then it can either be held by the soil for use by plants or other organisms, and then continue down into the soil, percolate down into the water table. And the water table in this image is denoted by the upside down triangle that you see, kind of small there. Let me see if I can get my pointer. Doot. And basically that's the top of the saturated zone. That's where we find groundwater. Turn my pointer off. So an important groundwater term that you've probably heard of is an aquifer. The United States Geologic Survey simply defines an aquifer as a geologic formation that is water-bearing. Pretty intuitive, right? So you see two different types of aquifers in this photo. A confined aquifer, which is confined between two impermeable layers, and an unconfined aquifer, which is what we generally refer to as a water table aquifer. One thing that you also see in this picture is that there's a stream that's pretty well connected, presumably to that unconfined water table aquifer. And that's really important because groundwater provides base flow for many of our streams. So there's that connection that we often don't see or think about sometimes, but it's really important. And when we talk about water quality and quantity issues, that connection is critical. So one of the challenges with groundwater use is that groundwater withdrawal from pumping can impact groundwater levels, and our rate of use often outpaces the rate of recharge in aquifers. And groundwater depletion is a serious concern, specifically here in the United States. We'll focus in on that here in a little bit. So worldwide, fresh groundwater is a major source of water for irrigation, agriculture, domestic use, and industry. Again, the United States Geologic Survey estimates that of all the world's water, fresh water makes up roughly 2.5% of all water. And roughly 30% of that 2.5% is groundwater. So if you do the math, that's 0.76% of all water on Earth is fresh groundwater. So that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. So it's a really valuable, important resource that we use a lot. It should also be noted that there's saline groundwater, but we won't focus on that because we don't really use that for uses like irrigation, domestic use, or industry. So from these 2010 figures from the National Groundwater Association, we can see that we're in the top 3 users, along with India and China, of groundwater for those major uses that I previously mentioned, being irrigation, domestic use, and industry. So according to the National Groundwater Association, groundwater is the most extracted raw material worldwide, with approximately 70% of groundwater withdrawals being used for agriculture worldwide. And this is one of the many reasons we focus on water quality and quantity issues here in the College of Agriculture, Food and Environment at the University of Kentucky. In reality, fresh water is scarce, so efficient, judicious use and protecting its quality is critical to our food system and the environment in general. I mentioned earlier that shallow groundwater helps provide base flow for our streams. So if you like recreating in our streams out there, it plays an important role in that too. Another important thing to be aware of is that around half the world's drinking water comes from groundwater. That's something that folks may not realize. So just as a breakdown of how we use fresh water in the United States in terms of surface water versus groundwater, in the US, fresh groundwater accounts for roughly 30% of the source of fresh water supply as of 2015. Top 3 uses of fresh groundwater in the US are irrigation, public water supply, and domestic supply. And then the nature of these 3 uses being for food production, potable water, highlight the importance of protecting groundwater quality. I mean, if we're going to be using them to irrigate our food and drink in our tap water, we want to make sure that the quality coming into those systems is as clean as possible, right? So several slides back, I mentioned the issue of groundwater depletion. And these are some of the major aquifers in the United States, and nearly all of them, except for some of the ones up in the Pacific Northwest and in Idaho, are experiencing significant depletion. And it may be no surprise that many of these identified aquifers that are experiencing depletion are major agricultural production regions that rely on groundwater for irrigation. So when we think of groundwater and being aware of groundwater, it's not just the quality, it's also the quantity and the efficiency of use. So we'll start to kind of hone in on Kentucky a bit here. And believe it or not, groundwater played an important role in the history of where many of our first settlements in Kentucky were founded. Our original settlers often located their camps and eventual cities near springs due to the reliable, clean water. This photo was actually taken yesterday at an environmental education event at McConnell Springs. This is their Blue Hole, which is a historic site that was where Lexington was essentially first settled and eventually founded. So here in Kentucky, about 5% of the water that we use every day is from groundwater sources. More than 1.5 million Kentuckians are served by 185 public water supply systems that rely on groundwater. That is something that before doing research for this presentation, I didn't realize how many public water supplies in Kentucky rely on groundwater. And then on top of that, another 416,000 Kentuckians use water wells or springs to provide themselves with drinking water. In Kentucky, water use patterns for major uses are very similar to national trends, with public and domestic use leading and industrial and mining use being greater than agriculture in Kentucky, since we have considerably less irrigation from groundwater than the nation as a whole. So groundwater quality is a major concern when we're discussing groundwater in the context of all these different uses. And the vulnerability of groundwater to pollution from activities on the surface varies across the state depending on the land use, but also the dominant geology of the area. So We often discuss this in the water resource management world in terms of groundwater sensitivity, and that refers to the susceptibility of the groundwater in the aquifer to pollution impacts from land use. And the susceptibility of the groundwater in the aquifer can be conceptualized and thought of in terms of how fast water flows through the aquifer, how predictable the flow direction is in the aquifer, and how much filtering the aquifer actually does. So if you're in an area like a karst aquifer, which I'll talk a little bit about here in just a second, like we have here around central Kentucky, water moves through it very rapidly through the voids and channels. If you're in an alluvial aquifer, I say out in western Kentucky, you might have more opportunity for filtration through some of the layers out there. So again, there's that karst word. I mentioned it, I know the last time that I was on the show. And it's no surprise that those bright orange areas that we saw on the groundwater sensitivity map, those that are the highest groundwater sensitivity rating across the state, they line up pretty much identically with the karst presence in Kentucky. And just as a reminder, about 55% of the state of Kentucky is underlain by rock with karst potential. So that can make managing for groundwater quality, a challenge at times, to say the least. Um, so just as kind of a review, I've discussed karst in the past, as I mentioned, but karst is a word used to describe a landscape that's underlain by dissolvable rock, and in our case, that's limestone. And it's known for a surface that's interspersed with sinkholes, sinking streams, caves, and springs, as shown in this image. So that being said, the potential for surface contaminants interacting with groundwater in this type of environment is quite high. So one of my favorite sayings is, if it's on the ground, it's in the water, and potentially going to our streams and potentially going into the groundwater in many of our areas of the state. So here are a few recommendations that may be helpful to protect water quality on your property. This isn't an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that most readily came to mind as I was doing a little research and preparing for this presentation. So ensuring that you're properly disposing of household wastes and protecting sinkholes from disposal of any of those wastes. Regularly inspecting and maintaining septic systems is really important in Kentucky, especially if you're in some of those areas of high karst potential. Making sure that we're restricting livestock access as much as possible and practicing nutrient management in agricultural operations to reduce the potential impact of fertilizer, manure, pesticides getting into groundwater systems can be really helpful for protecting groundwater quality. And then if you're able and you have the room, it's always recommended to develop vegetative buffers around any sensitive features, including streams, but sinkholes and any other karst features that you may have that are visible on your property that you're aware of. And then another challenge sometimes specifically mentioned a lot in the literature with underground storage tanks is inspecting them to make sure that they're properly maintained and not leaking, because that can certainly impact groundwater quality. So I'm going to end this presentation with sort of a parade of resources so that this can kind of be something that folks reference back to if they're interested in groundwater quality issues, so that they can find some of the resources specific to the state of Kentucky. So the next several slides will have QR codes and links to provide you with access if you need to come back and figure out ways that you can work on groundwater quality on your property. So the Kentucky Division of Water provides resources for homeowners utilizing cisterns and wells for drinking water to help identify certified water labs near their location to test the quality of their water. They also provide links to resources from CDC on maintenance, testing, treatment, and general water quality guidance on the various parameters that they recommend. So checking out this link and the resources that Kentucky Division of Water has related to groundwater quality testing is really important as a homeowner or anyone that has a well that they're using for a water supply. Another thing that can be really helpful is developing and implementing a groundwater protection plan. This is more applicable to regulated industries and activities that are more in the line of commercial, industrial, and mining related activities, construction. But it's good to be aware of groundwater protection plan requirements, and it may be something that could be generally helpful to a landowner. And it's essentially a way just to identify risks and vulnerabilities on a property and identify best management practices that can be utilized to protect groundwater quality. So when we think about a drinking water source, one of the key aspects to protecting water quality is what we call source water protection. So the Division of Water has a source water protection, wellhead protection program that I wanted to highlight. Source water protection is about ensuring safe and adequate drinking water supplies, which requires maintaining the quality and availability of present and future water supply sources. Wellhead protection is an important part of source water protection in Kentucky since we do utilize groundwater for a considerable number of our domestic water supply intakes, and they require high quality water to reduce the cost of treatment. And this is one that I always like to stress. If you're out there on the land and you've got property, if you have 10 acres or more and you're actively engaged in agriculture or forestry, a Kentucky law requires to develop and implement an ag water quality plan. And some of those best management practices, specifically best management practice number 4 from silviculture or forestry, is related to the protection of sinkholes. So check out the resources that are available related to developing an ag water quality plan, can provide a lot of helpful guidance. They've got some really interesting and useful BMP one-pager sheets that provide a lot of information on the costs, benefits, and operation and maintenance of many of the best management practices that might be useful in your operation that could help protect groundwater quality, but also surface water quality. We care about that a lot too, because as we've highlighted, they're intricately connected. So through extension, we've also got some really great resources that I wanted to highlight with some more QR codes and links so you can find them for yourselves. And these are titled Groundwater Quality, Sinkhole Management for Agricultural Producers, and then some of the fact sheets that were produced related to the Ag Water Quality Best Management Practice number 4, related to sinkholes in the silviculture section of the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan, specifically address that groundwater component. But a lot of the best management practices associated with things like streamside management zones, just things that protect general water quality, also have a real strong potential to protect groundwater quality here in Kentucky, depending on where you're at, as we've learned today. And I don't know if we have any fellow map nerds out there, but I consider myself kind of a map nerd. So here in Kentucky, we have a lot of really great groundwater mapping resources, and I wanted to highlight 3. And these are resources that are available through the Kentucky Division of Water's Water Maps portal. They have a variety of different maps, interactive web maps, so you don't have to have specialized geographic information system software. You can just click on this link and find whatever topic you're interested in. Several of them are specifically related to groundwater and groundwater quality, and browse till your heart's content and figure out what groundwater resources and groundwater quality looks like around you. And then we have this amazing resource that a lot of folks may not be aware of, the Kentucky Geologic Survey, and they have a plethora of historic data that also has a lot of current data related to groundwater well monitoring data and the results from decades of research and compliance monitoring and just general monitoring from private and public wells. So that's a great resource to check out if you're concerned or interested in groundwater quality. They also have a lot of really good interactive web maps that they share through that link as well. It's not just a database. And then if you are a desktop GIS person, this is a site down on the bottom, the Kentucky Gov Maps open data portal that I use a lot. It's going to have pretty much any Kentucky specific official Kentucky GIS layers that you'd be interested in. And a lot of those include things like sinkhole locations, groundwater well locations, groundwater quality monitoring results, but also those things like our watersheds and all the different stream layers that we have for Kentucky that can be really important when we're trying to consider an overall impact of land use on groundwater. So one thing I need to highlight today is that Lexington Water Week is coming up. So if you're in the Lexington area, or you want to travel to Lexington between the 16th and 23rd, we've got a lot of amazing events. College of Agriculture, Food and Environment is a sponsor along with LFUCG of Water Week, and this is actually the 5th Water Week. So we're really excited to bring a lot of great outreach events to the community, public engagement, and just interactive participatory science opportunities. So it's a week of activities for all ages, abilities, and interests. So check out Water Week if that's something that interests you. And I got to plug one more thing. Some of the work that my team does with agricultural best management practices, we're partnering for a field day coming up with Loretto Mother House Farm to share some of the work being done by Cody and Angela Rakes and their team to protect water quality through use of many of our Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan best management practices. So if you're in the Marion County area or want to travel down around Marion County, it's a beautiful place to go visit, great people. Reach out to Angela and come join us on Saturday, April 6th from 9 to 12, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. noon. So that's what I've got for you today. If there are any questions, feel free to pop them in chat, or we can hang on here and talk a little bit. So.
Thank you, Lee. We greatly appreciate that. It was a great presentation. You know, a lot of times when you showed that one, I always wondered, you know, it's like if something that you're putting on your yard or whatever, is that actually getting into your water? And you kind of answered that.
Oh, yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I loved your phrase, what if it's on the ground, it's in the water. And, you know, I
Mhm.
think that's so easy for people to not
You don't
consider,
think of
right? You
that.
know, I mean, I see people throwing stuff on the ground all the time, and I'm not sure that they really realize what that's doing, you know? So I really appreciate your presentation. We did have a couple of questions in the chat pod. We try to get to those if we could.
There were some people that had mentioned that there was local hosted hazardous waste events, and wanted to know if the Kentucky Department of Agriculture conducted anything like that for rural farm operations. And I didn't know if you did. Do you know of any that they
I
might?
don't know the answer to that. I've had that question before and I wasn't able to find a good answer, but I'm happy to try to find an answer again. And if Kevin wants to shoot me an email with his email address, I'll follow up with him directly.
Right. And we may have some county extension
Yeah.
agents on here that know some
It's
information.
possible.
If they want to share, that'd be great. I know in a former life, when I was a county agent, we would kind of collect all the pesticide containers and stuff for farmers and stuff
Mhm.
after they would rinse them to try to help, you know, address that. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some other kind of program out there.
Yeah, I was just down in Grayson County and they said they do the rinse and return program.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that may
that's
be the
right.
case in many
Yeah.
counties,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I would say, you know, certainly check with your local county extension agent.
Mhm.
They are such a wealth of resources. Not
Great.
only are they extremely kind of intelligent and caring about their communities, but they're so well connected, right? They know what's going on and they know who the players are. So I can't say enough good words about our county extension offices and agents out there.
They
So
have
check.
vast knowledge about
All of services.
That's
Which is a little scary because people come in and expect them to know everything about everything, which is impossible.
Right.
They do a great job. They really do.
yeah, they really help us connect to the county.
Oh,
So
yeah.
thanks to all of you that are out there listening and viewing today, all you
No doubt.
agents.
No doubt. They are the lifeblood of extension for sure. So
Mhm.
appreciate all.
Kevin, I've got your email address. I'll figure that out and share something with you as soon as possible.
There was another comment somebody was asking, say we always need more people collecting water samples and stuff. I know there's some water watch groups here in Kentucky. I didn't know if you might want to make a comment on Lee, if you knew anything about that or don't want to put down spot.
Actively engaged with those groups, but they are fantastic folks. So yeah, let's see. Angela shared that if you're interested in becoming a sampler for Kentucky Watershed Watch, contact Joanne Palmer, joanne.palmer@ky.gov. So certainly engage in that if you're interested in being a monitor and protector of water quality.
Right. And and I love the karst conversation and talking about that and that field day y'all got coming up at Laredo Mother House. That's going to be great. And Lee, hopefully you're going to be able to work with us too. We're as part of our Woodland Owner Short Course this summer. We're actually going to be at Roundstone's Native Seed, and they've got a lot of karst topography on their ground. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that and how they kind of try to manage and protect that water. So I'll put an early plug in for folks. Mark your calendar now for was it August 10th?
Right.
Yes, it will be.
I'm writing it down now because I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah, so it'll be great. But Lee, one other thing I wanted to kind of briefly mention with you or speak with you a little bit about is, for our forest landowners out there, this is important for them too, right? And we have a
Absolutely.
program, and you mentioned the Ag Water Quality Program, but we also have our Master Logger Program, right? And that really was kind of set up to take care of water quality here in Kentucky. I
Right.
think we recognize that roads and other things that are created when we're doing timber management or timber harvesting can be a big source of getting some stuff into the groundwater. So I'll just remind folks, if you are doing any activities, make sure you have on your forest land or woodlands out there, make sure you do have that ag water quality plan, and it'll address some of that too. But if you are having a timber harvest, then we really want to make sure that we have a Kentucky Master Logger on site and in charge, because they've been trained, Renee, to really understand, what their impacts are on the water resources. So please do that.
A great point, Billy. It's all connected.
It
Right.
really is, and I can't thank you enough for your presentation and kind of the work you're doing. And I tell you, you and Dr. Gumbert have been such a big boon to our department and our
Definitely.
extension team. We are just so delighted to have you all
Thanks.
part of this team that we're really trying to help the folks of Kentucky, whether they're agency folks or they're extension agents or landowners, be good stewards of the resources we have.
They always partner with us before, but now they're ours too. So it's awesome.
Yeah,
It's a great team to be a part of.
Yeah, we love having you all here for sure. And so if there's any other questions for Lee, I will mention also to folks, in addition to Lee being on with us right now, we also have in the shadows of Dr. Ellen Crocker. She's actually here at the conference with us doing some other work. But if there are some forest health related questions for any folks, I'll just mention that she's here with us as well. But Renee, a really good show. And Lee, thank you
Thank
again
you,
for a
Lee.
great presentation.
You're welcome.
All
Thank
right.
you all so much for having me. I always appreciate the opportunity to share the good news about ways we can protect water quality.
Right.
We'll have you back frequently.
Definitely. Don't you worry about that. All right. Thank you, Lee. We appreciate it.
Yeah, good stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good show. Big thanks to Dr. McNeil for putting that Wings of Kentucky together for us. We learned a lot about the American woodcock, which I'm not sure that everybody knew all that stuff about. I certainly did.
Oh, I didn't either. Yeah. So we really appreciate Lee being on too to talk about groundwater. And, there's a lot of things that I didn't know about that either.
Yeah, so be careful of what you put out on the ground out there, right? Because it will end in our water.
Yeah. And remember, you're drinking that, So we greatly appreciate you joining us each and every week on Wednesdays at 11 o'clock. And don't forget, next week we'll be on again, evidently, whether we're in the office or
somewhere. Coming to you from somewhere. Again, it's all about you all, and thank you all for being with us. We really appreciate y'all taking some time out of your busy days to kind of learn about some of our forests and wildlife and natural resources we have here in Kentucky. If you ever have anything you'd like to see on a future episode of From the Woods Today, we do have on our website, fromthewoodstoday.com, a little survey link that you can kind of click on and let us know if there's a topic you'd like to see, and we'll try to find a knowledgeable presenter that can give you some good resources on it.
Definitely. You know what, too? We have thousands of
good
shows on there, of hours rather, of different topics on there. So if you go to fromthewoodstoday.com, you can find our first show all the way. I don't know what we're like, I think 200 in May. So,
and growing.
Yes.
Another good point with that, Renee, I've heard a lot of people really enjoy the show as a podcast, right? So just as a reminder, Renee transports this into a podcast for us as well. And those are available as well on any of your streaming services. So however you get us, whether it's live, recorded, or via podcast, thank you for caring about Kentucky and our forests and wildlife and natural resources.
We really appreciate it.
Yes.
We will definitely see you next week. Take care.
All right. Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.